In the winter of 1846, a group of men entered a small church in the village of Pfeffelbach, in what is now the German state of Saarland. They had come for a coffin. It had been there for 13 years, unmarked, unvisited, lying in a simple crypt beneath the pulpit of a church that had no idea whose remains it held. The woman inside had been at the height of her life one of the most admired duchesses in Central Europe. The citizens of her adopted town had called her the mother of the country. Her son, at that very moment, was preparing to become the most powerful man in the British Empire. He did not know where her body was, neither did anyone else. Her name was Louise, and the family she died for had spent 15 years making sure the world forgot it. To understand what was done to Louise, you have to understand the world that did it. The year is 1817. The Napoleonic Wars have just ended. Europe is reassembling itself, redrawing borders, redistributing titles, arranging marriages with the mechanical efficiency of a continent that has learned to treat human beings as diplomatic currency. Louise Dorothea, Pauline, Charlotte, Frederica, Auguste is 16 years old. She is the only child of the Duke of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg, and she has just been told she will marry Ernst Duke of Saxe-Coburg, Saalfeld. He is 33 years old. She has met him twice. There is nothing unusual about this. In the courts of early 19th century Germany, a girl of 16 marrying a duke twice her age was not a transaction that required her consent. It required only her presence. The paperwork had been signed by men who would not be living with the consequences. She arrived at Ehrenberg Palace in Coburg in the summer of 1817. The palace was imposing, drafty, and full of the particular silence that settles into buildings where people have been unhappy for generations. Ernst was not unkind. He was simply absent from her rooms, from her evenings, from the marriage in every way that mattered. What she found instead was the town itself. The people of Coburg took to her immediately. She walked among them without ceremony. She knew their names. She involved herself in the welfare of the poor with a directness that made the court deeply uncomfortable. They called her Landesmutter, mother of the country. She was 17 years old. In June 1818, Louise gave birth to her first son. They named him Ernst, after his father. A year later, on August 26, 1819, her second son arrived at Schloss Rosenau, a small summer palace outside Coburg, where the air was cleaner and the rooms were filled with light. They named him Franz Albert August Karl Emanuel. He would be known to history simply as Albert. Louise was 18 years old when Ernst was born, 19 when Albert arrived. She had fulfilled in the language of the court her primary function. The succession was secured. The duchy had its heirs. And from the moment Albert drew his first breath, his future had already been decided by people who were not his parents. His father's brother Leopold was close to the British royal family. His cousin Victoria, born just 3 months before him in England, was heir to the British throne. The plan was already in motion before the ink on Albert's birth record was dry. He would marry Victoria. He would become the consort of the most powerful monarch on earth. Louise knew this. She had been told. What no one told her was what it would cost her. In those early years, she was happy, or as close to happy as a young woman could be in a palace that was not hers, in a marriage that had been arranged without her knowledge, in a country where the rules had been written entirely by men. She threw herself into motherhood with the same directness she had brought to her charity work. She was present with her sons in a way that was, by the standards of German aristocracy, almost unseemly. She read to them. She played with them on the grounds of Schloss Rosenau. She taught them to notice the world around them rather than simply pass through it. Albert, in particular, was her mirror. Fair-haired, blue-eyed, precise, and watchful. Years later, Queen Victoria would write in a private memorandum that when an old servant first saw Albert at Coburg in 1844, the woman was overcome by the resemblance to his mother, that she had to leave the room. But Ernst was unraveling. The Duke had never been faithful. This was not a secret. It was not even particularly remarked upon. In the courts of early 19th century Germany, a man's infidelities were his own business, subject to no comment and no consequence. A woman's were another matter entirely. By 1823, the marriage had collapsed in all but name. Ernst had taken a series of mistresses openly and without apology. Louise, isolated and increasingly unwell, had formed an attachment to Gottfried von Bülow, the court chamberlain. The following year, she became involved with Alexander von Hanstein, one of Ernst's own equerries, a young man who, unlike her husband, was actually present. Whether these relationships were affairs in the full sense or simply the desperate reach of a profoundly lonely woman towards something that resembled warmth, the historical record does not say with certainty. Louise herself never confirmed or denied them. What she wrote to a friend in a letter that survived was this: "I am to separate from the Duke. We came to an understanding and parted with tears for life, and then with the particular quietness of someone who has already accepted the outcome. Leaving my children was the most painful thing of all." She was 23 years old. She had been a wife for 7 years, a mother for 6. And she had spent most of those years in a palace where her husband's infidelities were invisible and hers were a matter of state. In those final months before everything broke apart, she did what she had always done. She walked through Coburg. She visited the sick. She sat with the elderly. The townspeople who saw her in those weeks described a woman who was still entirely present, still entirely herself, even as the ground shifted beneath her feet. Albert was 4 years old. He followed her through the rooms of Rosenau with the focused attention of a child who senses without being told that something is ending. He was right. It is the night of September 2nd, 1824. The palace at Coburg is dark and quiet. Albert is 4 years old. Ernst is 6. They are asleep in their rooms on the upper floor, unaware that downstairs their mother is being escorted to a waiting carriage. No one has told them she is leaving. No one will tell them until morning. And by morning, she will already be gone. She will never be permitted to return. What happened in that carriage on that road in the dark, and what it cost the boy who would one day reshape the British Empire, is the part of this story that history chose not to tell. The official account was simple. Louise had been unfaithful. Ernst had exercised his rights as a ruling duke. The separation was necessary, the terms were settled, and the matter was closed. What the official account did not mention was the timing. Ernst had been conducting open affairs for the entirety of their marriage. He had infected Louise, according to medical historians who have examined the evidence, with a venereal disease that would contribute directly to the cancer that killed her 7 years later. He had ignored her, humiliated her, and left her to navigate the court of Coburg alone, while he pursued other women with complete impunity. None of that was grounds for separation. Her relationships were. On the night of September 2nd, 1824, Louise was woken and told to dress. She was placed in a carriage and driven to Sankt Wendel, a small town in the Principality of Lichtenberg, nearly 300 kilometers from Coburg. It was a territory Ernst had received as a reward for his participation in the Napoleonic Wars, remote provincial, and entirely outside the social world she had known. She was given a small residence there. She was given no choice about any of it. Images of her sons were denied to her. Letters to them were monitored and restricted. Visitation rights did not exist. The two boys she had raised with her own hands, whose faces she knew better than her own, were now legally beyond her reach. Albert was 4 years old when the carriage left. He stood at a window by some accounts and watched it go. He would not see his mother again. The divorce was finalized on March 31st, 1826. 7 months later, in October of that year, Louise quietly married Alexander von Hanstein, the man who had followed her into exile. He was created Count of Pölzig and Beiersdorf for the occasion, a title sufficient to make the marriage respectable. They settled into the Schlösschen, the little palace in Sankt Wendel, and built around themselves the quietest possible version of a life. She involved herself again in the welfare of the town. The people of Sankt Wendel, like the people of Coburg before them, responded to her with the instinctive warmth of communities that recognize genuine attention when they receive it. They gave her again the name they had given her before: Landesmutter. She was 25 years old, and she was in this small principality that the rest of Europe had never heard of genuinely loved. She wrote to friends. She maintained what correspondence she could. She did not speak publicly about her sons or about what had been taken from her, because speaking would have given Ernst grounds to restrict even the limited contact that remained. Then in February 1831, her health collapsed. She had suffered from intermittent pain for several years. In March of that year, she fainted at the theater after suffering a hemorrhage and had to be carried out. Alexander brought her to Paris to consult with specialists. The diagnosis was cervical cancer. It was incurable. There was nothing to be done. She was 30 years old. From her sickbed in Paris, Louise wrote a final letter. It was addressed to Alexander, her second husband, and it has survived in the historical record in fragments that are almost unbearable to read. She wrote the feeling that my strength is sinking every hour, and that perhaps this illness will end only with my death induces me to make one more request of my deeply beloved husband. The request was not for money, not for a title, not for any of the things that the world she had been born into valued above all else. She asked to see her sons. The request was denied. Albert was 11 years old. He was in Coburg being educated for a future that had already been mapped out without his knowledge or consent. He had not seen his mother in 7 years. He did not know she was dying. The court of Saxe-Coburg had decided with the quiet efficiency of institutions that prioritize reputation above everything that the boy did not need to know. Louise died in Paris on August 30th, 1831. She was 30 years old. Albert was not there. Ernst was not there. No member of the family she had married into was present at the end. Alexander von Hanstein was with her. He was the only one. Louise was 30 years old. She had been a mother, a duchess, an exile, and a wife. She had been loved by 2 towns and erased by 1 court. She had died in a foreign city in a rented room asking for children she was never permitted to see. And now, even in death, the House of Saxe-Coburg was not finished with her. Her body was about to disappear. Not metaphorically, not from the history books, physically. The coffin containing the embalmed remains of the mother of Prince Albert would vanish from official record for 15 years, passing through a legal assistance house, a forgotten village church, and the deliberate silence of a dynasty that had every reason to keep her buried. The question is why? And the answer tells you everything about the family that would become the House of Windsor. When Louise died in Paris in August 1831, her body was embalmed and returned to St. Wendel. Alexander von Hanstein arranged for her to be kept at the Schlösschen, the little palace where they had lived together. He was grieving. He was also in the political architecture of the German duchies entirely powerless. The House of Saxe-Coburg moved quickly. Within months of her death, Louise's coffin had been removed from the Schlösschen. The official explanation, such as it was cited, intrigues within the ducal family. The coffin passed into the custody of a local legal assistant, a private citizen, not a church, not a crypt, not any of the dignified resting places that a duchess, even a disgraced one, might reasonably expect. It stayed there for 2 years. In 1833, it was moved again, this time to the church of a village called Pfeffelbach in the Principality of Lichtenberg. A small church, an unremarkable village, a simple crypt beneath the pulpit where the coffin was placed, and for all practical purposes, forgotten. No marker, no plaque, no record in any document that the court of Saxe-Coburg chose to maintain. Albert was 13 years old when his mother's body was moved to Pfeffelbach. There is no evidence that he was told. There is considerable evidence that the decision to obscure her burial location was made deliberately by men who understood that a visible grave would raise visible questions, and that visible questions were precisely what the dynasty could not afford. Because Albert's future was still the plan. The marriage to Victoria was still the plan. And a future prince consort of England could not have attached to his name and his lineage the story of a mother who had been expelled from her own home in the middle of the night, denied access to her dying children, and buried in a location so obscure that even her family did not know where she was. So they erased her. Not clumsily, not all at once, but with the patient thoroughness of institutions that have been managing inconvenient truths for centuries. Her name was removed from the official genealogies that circulated in court documents. Her portraits were quietly moved to storage. Her letters were restricted. The people of Coburg and St. Wendel who remembered her were not in a position to publish their memories in any form that would reach the courts of Europe. Albert grew up knowing almost nothing about her. What fragments reached him came through servants, through whispered conversations, through the particular silence that surrounds a subject that adults have decided a child must not understand. He knew she had left. He did not know why. He did not know that the official account that she had been unfaithful, that the separation had been necessary, that the matter had been handled correctly, had been constructed specifically to ensure that he would never ask too many questions. He kept for the rest of his life a small pin she had given him when he was a child. It was one of the only objects of hers he possessed. Queen Victoria would later write after Albert's death in 1861 that he had spoken of his mother with much tenderness and sorrow and had been deeply affected when, after their marriage, he read for the first time the full accounts of her illness and her death. He had not known until then how she had died. He had not known until then that she had asked to see him. He had not known until then that the request had been denied. What that knowledge cost him in the privacy of his own heart was never recorded. What is recorded is that Albert became in his marriage to Victoria the most ferocious advocate for family that the British royal household had ever seen. He restructured the court around the children. He insisted on presence, on warmth, on the kind of attentive parenting that was so foreign to aristocratic tradition that his contemporaries found it faintly eccentric. He was building with the materials available to him the childhood he had lost. He died at Windsor Castle on December 14, 1861. He was 42 years old. Victoria never recovered. Louise was not mentioned in the official accounts of his life. She had been too successfully erased for that. Her coffin in the years after Albert's death was finally moved to the ducal mausoleum at the Friedhof am Glockenberg in Coburg, where it rests today. The move was quiet. There was no ceremony. There was no acknowledgement of what had been done, or why, or for how long. Her remains had been passed between a legal assistance house and a forgotten village church, while her son grew up to reshape the British Empire without ever knowing where she was buried. History had what it needed from Louise of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg. It had Albert. And it had decided a long time ago that Albert was all it required. In 1864, Queen Victoria sat down to write a private memorandum about her mother-in-law. She had never met Louise. She had married the man Louise had raised without ever knowing the full story of what had been done to her. What Victoria wrote was brief, careful, and in its own way, an act of quiet restoration. The princess is described as having been very handsome, though very small. Fair, with blue eyes. Prince Albert is said to have been extremely like her. She wrote that Albert had spoken of his mother with much tenderness and sorrow, that he had been deeply affected after their marriage by reading the accounts of her illness, that one of the first gifts he had made to Victoria was a small pin, the pin Louise had pressed into his hand when he was a child, in the last days before the carriage came. Victoria understood in writing that memorandum that she was doing something the House of Saxe-Coburg had spent 40 years refusing to do. She was saying the name. She was putting it in a document. She was insisting in the quiet, authoritative way that only Victoria could insist on anything that this woman had existed, had mattered, and had not deserved what was done to her. It was not enough. It could not be enough. But it was something. Louise of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg died at 30 in a rented room in Paris, without her children, without her title, without any of the things the world she had been born into had promised her. She was buried in a location so obscure that her own family did not know it for 15 years. She was erased from the official record of a dynasty that owed its entire future to the son she had raised. That son gave Victoria 5 daughters and 4 sons. Those children and grandchildren populated the thrones of Europe for the next century. The House of Windsor as it exists today, every king, every queen, every coronation at Westminster Abbey descends in direct line from the woman they buried in a village church and chose to forget. And almost no one alive today knows her name. Dynasties are built on stories, and the stories they tell about themselves are almost never the whole truth. Louise of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg was not a footnote. She was the foundation. She raised the man who built the modern British monarchy, and the family he built it for spent generations, making sure you would never know her name. Now you do. There is a woman in the next story whose life was erased by the same machinery in a different century, on a different continent. She was not a duchess. She was something far more dangerous to the empire that discarded her. She was a goddaughter of Queen Victoria who decided to fight back. If these are the stories you have been looking for, the ones history buried, the ones that were never supposed to reach you, then stay. There is a new one waiting every week. And not one of them will be the version you were taught.